Oh, there we go.
Nice.
Oh, now I feel better. Oh, yeah, see.
Hey, don't you guys know this is an unlawful assembly? You gotta move aside. Come on. Come on. Come on, guys. Come on, guys. Move aside. Oh, shit. Well, hello again, my friends, and welcome back to 15-Minute Free Thinking. I'll be your host. My name is Josh or Carpo. I'd like to give a little bit of a pretext for this video before I make it, or I should say my podcast. I'm so used to saying video because I've been making YouTube videos for so many years that it's almost like a second nature. But podcast is a different format for me, so bear with me here. I made a podcast already about police corruption, and I want to make sure that it's well known that this is not just a complaint about police or police problems in this world and my nation specifically. The podcast was actually intended to be rules for idiots and the ignorant, if you will. That's kind of a joke, but not really. You know, we have to call a duck a duck. Anything in our society that's a problem has to be addressed. And we have to have some basic rules for a civil society. Now, I came up with 5 rules of my own, and I was going to make a podcast about that subject, and once I got more into it, I looked down the list after I heard about a police case where they had recently pulled over this lieutenant. It's on the news. There's always some local news. Even between the time when I started planning to make this video and today, there was a shooting, in, I believe, Minneapolis. It's not an issue of whether the police have the right to use force or whatnot, but it has more to do with these basic 5 rules that once I applied it to police, I realized how much they do abuse those basic rules. So, pardon the language in this one. I will use the F word a few times, so, children might want to leave the room. The basic 5 rules that I came up with in I was trying to consider of all the different things we can do in our lives, not involving ourselves in others' lives is, I think, the most crucial. What I mean by that is not trying to control others or tell them how to live their lives. But rule number 1 is keep your fucking hands to yourself. This applies to all types of abusers, people who hit children, people who hit their wives. And this is an extremely common and devastating situation with how many people are actually abused and how few come forward because of fear. Rule number 2, don't fuck with other people's money. And that comes down to how you do business, whether you're holding them back from making an income because you're passing laws that prevents them from getting a job, or making it more difficult for the average person or an individual to make a living and feed their family. And that also includes stealing from other people. So you don't fuck with other people's money. Number 3 is do not lie just so you can keep your ego intact. Because when others are affected by it, you need to address that. In other words, if you want to be a liar in your life, that's one thing. If you make a claim and you make a deal and you don't abide by that deal, or you lie to someone so you can take their income or their life savings, that is unacceptable. And but also when if it's just to keep your ego intact, so you don't feel like you look like the bad guy, even when you're wrong, I think that's something that we shouldn't do to others. That would also be slander and, doxing people who didn't really do what we claim they did, for example. And that's all too common on the internet these days. Number 4 is have some fucking respect for others. And that's very basic. That's just goes with all 5. It's the one that drives them all together. Just have respect for other people. Sometimes that's more difficult for people to understand what respect actually is. But it basically means giving people their space and being fair in your dealings. And the very last one here is don't fuck with people's freedom. And this is probably the most crucial. And this is when I realized how much this applies to police. They don't keep their hands to themselves. They always fuck with other people's money. They always lie to keep their ego intact. They don't have respect for other people. And they don't give a shit about people's freedom. And let me make sure that I make this very clear. I'm not saying all police are like this. In fact, it's a vast majority of police are well-trained. Well, perhaps they should be better trained, but I should say well-intentioned and fair, honest people who are just trying to better their community. As I heard one guy lay it out, there are good cops, there's bad cops, then there's psychopathic cops. And often the psychopathic cops are the ones who are planting drugs on people or making others look bad. And that's the most horrible thing I can imagine, because that doesn't just slander them, but it also takes away their freedom. And it's important that we stand up to these things within our society. This also relates to bullies and all different types of people within society. But, and I understand that we have drug laws that are a major part of the issue of why these things happen. And I have a completely separate take on that, which I'll save for another podcast. But the one thing I'd like to say about police here is that showing restraint takes character. And we are constantly told that everything endangers police. Not everything is a danger to police. In fact, it's not even in the top 10 most dangerous jobs in the U.S. The thing is, good cops get harassed by these cop watch groups. They will go into police stations and just make themselves look like jerks to good cops who aren't harming anyone. But then bad cops also get away with murder. And when you harass police, it puts them on the defensive, and that's natural. But the thing I'd like to say to police out there is that harassing citizens does the exact same. It puts everyone on the defensive when we are afraid if we get pulled over, we might get shot for a simple expired tag or even a non-violent felony. Or a non-violent charge or a misdemeanor that we had in the past. And here's where it comes down to my point. Police, just like politicians, should be held to a higher standard. Often they say police are put in danger, that police have to cope with criminals all the time and they have to be protective and they might make mistakes. The thing is, you can't compare what police do to what other people do or to what criminals do. The same way as when police break the law, when they serve warrants that are illegitimate, or when they knowingly arrest people or harass people that they have no real reason, to harass. This puts everyone on the defensive, and it's shameful for everyone involved. Now here's where it gets interesting, because reporting on corruption is extremely dangerous. Powerful people do not like exposure. In Whitley County, I won't go into too much detail. I don't even recall what state. It's a poor area. There's a $26,000 average income. There was a Sheriff Hodge there, and I was going to go into detail on this, but I just wanted to briefly touch on this. Back in the early 2000s, he was taking payouts. He was taking from people he would arrest. He arrested one guy. He served a warrant, and the guy had 100 and something guns, and the guy knew he was going to jail. So the cop basically said, well, we're not going to say anything or file this, and I'll let you go if you pay me $150,000, because the guy was a closet millionaire. So, these police, these chiefs of police and sheriffs will take these huge payouts from the local citizens to keep their mouths shut. In the end, he was exposed by a 20-year-old journalist who went in and asked him all these questions and caught him on the spot. Oh, people want to interview me? He was all excited to tell his story until the guy asked him where the guns were. In the end, it was just another one of many cases, but this is one of the few ones where he actually got charged, and I believe he was 15 years is his sentence. But that was one of the very few cases, where police were actually charged with something they did wrong. And the thing is, to reiterate, there are mostly good cops out there. If we continuously think that all cops are bad, what that's going to do is just reinforce their bonding together against the citizens. And that's what happens. That's what's been happening for a long time. But there's more to it. Yes, there's systematic injustice, but realizing that the police work for the corporations, that the police work for the government, not for the people. And that's the irony, because the government is the people. The politicians are not the government. We are the government. If you want to, get technical within this democracy we have, we're supposed to be able to at least have some say in how our, situations are dealt with in our society. However, to move into another territory, a lot of police won't help with the issues we really need. It comes down to this problem I've had when our car was stolen. We've had our car stolen at least 3 times, and each time there's nothing that can really be done until the car is, found, right? So it's the same thing with theft or robbery. Really, there's nothing to go on. There's not a lot of investigation unless there's something to gain. There's a lot more money put into civil forfeiture, where police are allowed to take your funds and seize your boats and your cash, and they are able to fund their departments and fill their own pockets with it. And this is rampant across the country right now. They have found several places where if you look at the statistics on all the raids that have been done, they've all been on very wealthy people. It's always looking to, find something on someone. And it's just disgusting to me that we let these things happen. Even when you have an address of somebody who stole from you. I've been involved in a case like this personally, where somebody I know had their purse stolen out of their car, broken window. There was, witnesses, and they gave the police the address, and they said, oh yeah, we know about those people. There's nothing we can really do. And it's like, okay, so the people need to be able to protect themselves, correct? In one way or another, it is in our hands. The more that we need the police, the more that there will be police, but the more that we are able to take care of each other, then, the less we will have to rely on police, because it's honestly scary for a lot of people to even have to call a cop. But what do we do about things like this? What about chronic theft? Shoplifters? It's interesting because right now in a lot of areas of the country, there are, policies in place where they won't even stop a shoplifter. There's cases of people just going in and loading up and walking out constantly all day long. We all pay for this in higher prices, in insurance rates, but in the past, I thought about, you take a person to jail, it does nothing. They get a free meal and they get out the next day. it only works on people who actually want to make amends and get their shit together. But if people are too poor to survive and they're shoplifting food, that's a different story altogether. But, I think about ancient times when they would cut off a finger, when times were lean, right? But does it really even matter? Is it more up to the store to protect themselves? And then the question arises, well, if a security guard in a store harms somebody who's stealing, then they can get charged. It's a very difficult situation to navigate. That's the point I'm making. And so a lot of people, their answer, and what I'm getting at here, is that the answer to not having police or not needing police would be to have militias, to have neighborhood watch groups. And I've done a lot of thinking about this. And I've looked at the neighborhood, groups in the past and the discussions people have, and it can be worse. It's not just mob rule within police communities, it's groupthink within neighborhoods. If you see one person who looks suspicious walking down the street and you're a citizen, you might be just as likely to shoot that person as a cop would. And this is where I'm hoping to go with this, We have to know the intentions of other people. We have to understand one another. We have to stand together. We have to protect our neighborhoods, but we also have to be a little smarter in the way that we deal with one another. I don't know what the real answer is, but I guess we have to behave and we have to check each other. Nobody is winning with drug laws. Nobody's winning with prison parolees not being able to find jobs, or the fact that people are getting charged with stupid crimes and, for the prison industrial complex. It's a completely different story, which I could go into. But if you get one traffic violation, you can be broke for years. When people can't pay a fine, it will just compound. And for one simple ticket, you can have your license suspended, and then you'll have to drive to work. Then you get your license suspended again. And over, this thing recurs, and it's a way for cities to fill their coffers and to, pay their bills. And this is why we have a problem with police who pull people over in these neighborhoods, these small and large towns that are looking to just get a speeding ticket out of you, right? Not that you were actually speeding. For example, any police officer who pulls a person over going 1 mile over the speed limit, it's shameful. And it happens all the time. In Tennessee, there's areas where these drug task forces pull over cars just to ask them if they have money. And these are drug task forces. They know the drugs are going up the other lane on the highway, yet they sit on the other side of the road because it's much easier for them to collect money than it is drugs, even though they should stop the drugs. This was an ongoing case several years ago. And look, I'm not here to hate on cops, but I've heard too many police officers tell people they don't have their First Amendment rights, that they can't record them, that they can't, that they're forced to tell them who they are, even though when they're not charged with a crime. And it's amazing how few people really know their rights. And look, I'd like to go into that, and I'd like to tell you this is what you can and can't do, and this is when you should invoke your First Amendment rights or your Fifth Amendment rights, and this is when you should talk and not talk. This is what you should say. I'm not an expert on that. I'm not a lawyer. I just know basically you should say nothing for the most part. My experience with police, I've had my house raided. I've been arrested at work on a warrant and lost my job as a manager, all over cannabis many years ago. And I remember when they came to my house and tried to get me to rat on other people, and I said, no, I'm not going to do that shit. But the cop himself ended up getting demoted years later for, surprise, the way that he was doing business and raiding people he shouldn't have. In my case, I did have a few small cannabis plants, but somebody had told on me, and it became this. I had this whole article put up about me: drug dealer ignores borders, now police do too. That was the headline. And not only that, but they threw me into the same article as this other killer who had been caught. And I thought, that's defamation of character. But, I was young and I was stupid. And I know now that a police officer can come to my home and destroy my house looking for someone, and that I have no way to get that money back, no recourse. People actually think that if the police just, harm their home, or if they let them in to look for someone and they tear your house apart, I've seen them punch tanks through walls and throw in gas grenades and all kinds of things, flashbangs, and then just leave their mess, and shooting up houses that somebody hides in. If somebody ran into your house and hid there from the cops, they could shoot that place up and basically say, sorry, there's nothing at all we can do about it. And you can sue them, sure, but, then you have to get a lawyer, and these things are complicated, and until people face it, they don't realize. There have been issues of warrants where the cops had the wrong address. And even in a case where it's obviously their mistake, and they love using their toys when they do these raids. So not being safe in your own home is scary for people. And I guess I can't sit here and say cops suck and complain about it. I was just hoping maybe one police officer might hear this and realize that it's important to do your research and be cautious and calm and stoic. There's too many times where I've seen people who the cops claimed they were high in order to just, try to get some charge on them. Or, if they think that you're being too rowdy, they can shoot you up with ketamine. I mean, it's a strange world that we live in. And you can't fight in court without a lawyer. And there are lazy judges out there. There are also lazy cops out there. And there's something called qualified immunity. And this has ended in Denver, Colorado, I believe, recently. But qualified immunity allows police not to be, basically liable if they make a mistake. And as I heard one sheriff say, he said, well, if we end qualified immunity, then police may hesitate. And I said, yeah, that's exactly what we want. I'm not talking about hesitating to, defend people or protect others. If somebody has a gun drawn and they're an actual threat, that's one thing. But yes, hesitate before you shoot somebody in their own car who's fleeing, or shoot someone in the back, or shoot someone who's coming at you with a fist. I know it's difficult to be a cop, but ending a life is something we need to take very seriously. Another aspect is the fact that we really can't gather in groups the way we used to. There were plenty of limitations put on gatherings. This is why you have to get a permit. And look, I get it. It's leadership doesn't want people standing up for what's important. And unfortunately, a lot of police are so brainwashed that they believe that, protests are somehow a threat. Now, look, last year's something separate. It's a separate issue. Issues of police brutality and the protests that have been going on. Even yesterday, there was a new shooting. A kid pulled away and he jumped back in his car while he was being arrested. The police pulled a gun, claimed she thought she pulled her taser. Look, I listened to the video. I watched the story. It does sound like she legitimately made a huge mistake. I don't know. I never will know, but it doesn't matter. Either way, as a 26-year veteran, you should know whether you're pulling your gun or your taser. This puts a huge perspective on thinking clearly under times of stress, when your life isn't actually threatened. And it often comes down to ego. I hate to say it. I've seen people arrested on their own front porch for filming cops across the street. I mean, I get it that police don't like being talked down to, and there are some real jerks out there who follow cops around constantly. But this doesn't mean that you can abuse the badge. We are protecting often our own land when we have security forces going out to places like Standing Rock, or people who are in Ecuador, for example, standing up to Chevron in Texaco, and people used military weapons on them because they were protesting protection of their own land. the poorest are affected the most. It's always been this way. So what is right or correct doesn't always wear a uniform. It's in our hearts. We need to be able to recognize that. We know what's right and wrong. And unfortunately, the good ones are often demonized as traitors. And who's a real traitor to the people? Well, it would be that small percentage of bad and psychotic police out there that make everybody look bad. This also goes for politicians. The idea of stop and frisk somebody because you think they look suspicious is one of the most absurd laws, but it's still implemented in areas. The idea that failure to identify should be a reason for a cop to arrest you is ludicrous. You have absolutely no obligation to show your ID to a police officer if you're doing nothing wrong and you're not being charged. You need to know your rights. And unfortunately, the cops hate that. I've heard them call people constitutionalists. Oh, you're one of those guys. They'll intimidate them. And I think, as a police officer, shouldn't you be grateful that the citizens know their rights? I know it hurts sometimes not to know the truth about your own laws and to call your own knowledge of the legal system into question, but you can look up statutes anytime. I feel like there's no loyalty to the public. There's an intimidation. And that's why this issue is so important to me. It's one thing to look for somebody to charge something, It's another thing to plant drugs in the backseat of somebody's car and claim that they had them after you've searched that car 6 times, as in a recent case happened. And unless you have it on video, we'll never know what really happened, which is why in today's world, everybody has video. And so don't feel nervous about filming the police and making sure they're doing their job correctly. Because as I said, they try to hold themselves to a higher standard. I'd like to go into excess force, the way that people are beaten, the fact that we used a helicopter to hunt down a guy who stole a leaf blower out of somebody's shed. It was an amazing case. You should Google it. It's pretty funny. Yeah, they had all these cops looking for this guy who supposedly stole a leaf blower. And I thought, how much does it cost the taxpayers to run a helicopter to look for a leaf blower? Just give the guy a new leaf blower, my God. So drug laws don't work. They cost taxpayers money. Eyewitness testimony sucks. No-knock warrants should be ended. Drug war is one thing, but in Portugal, they've managed to really curb crime by eliminating their drug war and basically not just legalizing, but just tolerating all drugs. And meanwhile, the FDA can sell us vitamins and the CIA can import cocaine into the country. And they can try to eliminate natural plants and criminalize anything that the people want to do. It's a pretty strange world to live in. And so I don't know what the answers are. I'd love to hear your take on it, but unfortunately this is a one-sided conversation. But remember, we are the public. We vote. We make differences if we want to. And that's why I think speaking up is important. Thanks for listening. Thank you to my patrons, my subscribers on YouTube. Feel free to visit me on various platforms in random times, and I'll talk to you all next time. You be well. Thanks for coming to Carpo's channel, yo.